Commodore, my 64, my Commodore 64.
The misty powers of magic have settled over the great forest lands, twisting, swirling into every nook of the village of Farron. Evil spells wisp about like fog, draining courage and trust from the hearts of men. Good magics have vanished, and no longer are there brave warriors who wield weapons of steel against the land's enemies. The Protectorate's sword is gone. Thus begins the backstory for the classic Sword of Fargoal, a roguelike dungeon crawler for the Commodore 64 developed by Jeff McCord and published by EPYX in 1983. Let's dig in. Sword of Fargoal began taking shape in the late 70s. While still a high school student in Lexington, Kentucky, Jeff McCord began developing a Dungeons & Dragons inspired game called Gamma Quest II for the Commodore PET. The game featured randomized levels that would be revealed as the player moved their character around, much like how the Sword of Fargoal eventually would. But with only 4K of RAM and a simple character set for graphics, the game was a far cry from the final version we know and love. But even with the limited power of that platform, Gamma Quest II became a hit at school, and students would stay late to help playtest and provide suggestions for improvement. Inspired by how much people liked the game, and with the hopes of making a little money in the nascent gaming industry, McCord submitted Gamma Quest to multiple publishers. Enter our friends at EPYX. They had seen success with the D&D inspired Temple of Apshai series and were looking for games to add to their catalog. They offered McCord a $2,000 advance to develop a version for the VIC-20, which was released in 1982 as the Sword of Fargoal. McCord then ported the game to the much more powerful Commodore 64, which EPYX released in 1983. It was an immediate success, selling 30,000 copies in the first year and would eventually go on to sell about 100,000. A pretty significant feat in those days, especially considering how rampant software piracy was. The well-written and beautifully illustrated manual provides us with the plot. Here's a quick summary. An evil wizard named Umla tricked a hero named Gedwin to retrieve a powerful sword from a temple. He then blinded Gedwin and stashed the sword deep in a treacherous dungeon, as it is a threat to him. If Gedwin could get the sword back, now known as the Sword of Fargoal, he could defeat Umla and end his despotic reign over the people of the Great Forest. This is where you enter the story. You have been living under Umla's iron fist for too long. You've therefore decided to save the world by braving the dungeon, retrieving the sword, and delivering it to Gedwin. To do this, you will need to venture deep into the dungeon to find the sword, which lies somewhere between levels 15 and 20. Once found, you will then need to escape quickly. You have about 30 minutes to win the game. The task seems straightforward enough, but actually finishing the game is fiendishly difficult, and most adventures end in failure. Death is permanent and there are no save points. Finding the sword is tough enough, but actually escaping within the time limit is one of the toughest challenges in gaming. Beating the Sword of Fargoal takes equal amounts of patience, skill, and luck. When the game starts, you find yourself in the middle of a completely obscured playing area with a few measly hit points, a short sword, and a single healing potion. As you begin moving around, the map around you is revealed and you will begin encountering monsters, finding treasure, running into traps, and discovering stairways. Treasure chests appear regularly and they have an equal chance of being helpful or containing a trap. Helpful items include spells that can heal or protect you, a magic sack for carrying more gold, maps for later levels, or an enchanted weapon. The little sound that plays when you find a magical item is wonderful and is like a little shot of endorphin. Traps, on the other hand, are brutal. The ceiling might collapse in on you, a pit could open below you, you could be teleported to another random area of the dungeon, or the chest could just explode. All of these things can abruptly end your run. But somehow, almost worse, traps can also make you lose your map, resulting in lost progress as you try to explore each level. Bags of gold are scattered throughout the levels, and gold can be exchanged for experience points at the temple that is located on each floor. Temples also provide a safe space for your character where hit points regenerate twice as fast. As a result, it's a very common gameplay strategy to spend a lot of time at the temples. We're talking many minutes. In the old days, waiting around to heal was a great time to catch up on homework and chores. And of course, there are the monsters, and we're not talking about lions and tigers and bears here. The Fargoal bestiary contains over 20 different monster types. There are beasts like werebears, direwolves, dimension spiders, and shadow dragons. There are humanoids like dwarven guards, mercenaries, assassins that hide in the shadows, and the always fearsome warlords. And then you have the real jerks of the bunch, mages and demons. Both of these monsters will appear as a different type, but when attacked, they will steal your hard-earned experience points or spells. I can say with great authority, and after much yelling at my poor 64, the demons and mages suck. Battle itself is simple. Simply move over an enemy and combat occurs. But how you engage matters. If possible, you want to be the aggressor, as that allows you to disengage if your hit points start getting too low. If a monster attacks you, on the other hand, there is no way to leave unless you have a teleport spell, which you can activate by spamming the fire button on your joystick. Getting jumped by a tough enemy is a great way to meet a quick demise. Fortunately, your enemies don't heal, so a common gameplay strategy is to take a run at a tough enemy, head to the temple to regenerate, and then come back later to finish them off. And then finally, after 15 or more levels of traps, monsters, and jerky demons, you find the vaunted Sword of Fargoal. Congratulations! But not really. This is actually when the game gets real. After finding the sword, you have 33 minutes to reach the top of the dungeon. That may sound like plenty of time, but it basically means you have 2 minutes to explore each level, which are still randomly generated, avoiding monsters and chests along the way in hopes of finding a stairway going up. But that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is that every monster in the game now knows that you have the sword, and they want it back. If you get attacked, they will steal the sword and instantly disappear, returning it to the level it came from. This almost always means failure, and in a game with no saves, it's brutal. I can imagine the frustrated screams of a player who almost makes it back to the top, only to have the sword stolen by a gargoyle on level 3. This right here is why the game is so difficult to complete. You can take your time getting to the sword, and exploring the levels can even be relaxing. Escaping to the top while avoiding everything is 33 minutes of sheer panic. If you are lucky enough to escape, you are presented with a brief message, the summary of your game, and an option to play again. The game doesn't record the best completion times, but players are encouraged to repeatedly play to beat their best. From a graphical perspective, the Sword of Fargoal is, in a word, charming. The sprites used are distinctive and colorful and are a joy to watch on the screen. But the true stars of the show are the sound effects. The dungeon literally groans when the monster's turn occurs. Traps emit unique and devastating sounds. But most of all, the sounds during combat, the gnarls, claws, shrieks, thuds, and clanks are fantastic and fun. My friends and I played Sword of Fargoal a ton in the 80s, and I don't think any of us ever emerged with the sword. I know I never did. But beating it never seemed to be the point. The gameplay was just so much fun. It was an accessible, bite-sized version of D&D in our living rooms, and we loved it. The Commodore 64 Appreciation Society absolutely adores the Sword of Fargoal. It was among the very first D&D-like adventure games we ever played, and it holds a treasured spot among our favorites of all time. And many others feel the same. It currently holds a score above 80% on Lemon 64, and commonly appears in the upper echelons of favorite game lists. Somewhat surprisingly, this was the only game that Jeff McCord ever developed. But the story of the Sword of Fargoal didn't end with the C64 era. In 2009, Jeff and others re-released the game for iOS. It's a fun game that is still available through Game Club, and it has a strong rating. Personally, I will always prefer the original 64 version, but it's fantastic that the game is still being introduced to a new generation of gamers. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. And if you have any of your own Sword of Fargoal stories, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Hope to see you again.